All right, it's approaching 11 o'clock. The state rested, subject to rebuttal. First of all, is there a motion at the end of the state's case?
Yes, Judge, we are moving to for a directed verdict. The state has charged us as a first-degree intentional homicide. Sorry, not a directed verdict. I'm saying a motion to dismiss at the end of the state's case. The state has charged us as a first-degree intentional homicide. This charge was increased after previous charges for reckless. I know that all facts have to be in favor, looked at favorably, in the light most favorable to the state in this case. With the evidence that's been submitted is the video and some of the testimony about one gunshot. In our view, that's just simply not enough to indicate an intent to kill. So we're asking the court to dismiss at this time.
Mr. Hubner.
Your Honor, at this stage of the proceeding, the evidence must be viewed in the light most favorable to the state. There is one shot, that is true, but it is a shot to the face. The defendant shoots a firearm into the victim's face at close range. Intent to kill can mean either intent to kill or the individual, it's practically certain, would cause the death. When you have a gun and you point it at someone's face and you put a round into their brain, it is practically certain to cause their death. Also, a witness who saw this described it as cold-blooded. That, in the light most favorable to the state, is evidence to proceed on this charge. And even if you were to accept what defense counsel stated, the remedy then would be for the court to amend the charge to what there is evidence of. But in this case, there clearly is evidence of first-degree intentional homicide to go to a jury.
Right, I agree with that. Taking the evidence in the light most favorable to the state. The testimony is that the defendant, as the state noted, at least allegedly, pulled out a handgun and shot Mr. Cleereman in a very close range. The testimony was 2 or 3 feet, maybe closer, maybe a bit further away, and he put a bullet literally between his eyes and in his brain. That is enough to proceed. The defense motion's denied. Who's the defense first witness?
Judge, we would call Officer Raymond Debraska.
Raymond who?
Debraska, D-E-B-R-A-S-K-A.
All right, I'll bring the jury in. You can come up, officer. The jury's coming in. You can remain seated, please. All right, the jury's back. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, the state rested their case. The defense has now decided to call witnesses and put on a case. This is a defense witness. Sir, if you can stand and raise your right hand, please.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Yes.
Please be seated. State your full name, spelling first and last for the record, and you may remove your
Officer Raymond Debraska. It's R-A-Y-M-O-N-D D-E-B-R-A-S-K-A.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Judge. Officer Debraska, can you give us a brief overview of your current employment at the Milwaukee Police Department?
I'm a police officer with the Milwaukee Police Department. I'm currently assigned to District 1.
Okay, and how long have you been an officer with the Milwaukee Police Department?
Since 2012.
2012. And currently, what is your title there?
Police officer.
Okay, and so you've been a police officer since 2012, or do you have any other prior experience before that?
I've been a police officer since 2012. From 2009 to 2012, I was a police aide.
Okay, can you give us...
Police aid.
Aide.
Police aide. As a police officer, can you give us also an overview of what some of your duties are?
Responding to calls put into service for us, patrolling, doing traffic stops, things of that nature.
Okay. Would you be known as like a field officer?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have a partner?
Yes.
And who is your partner?
At that time, it was Officer Esther Kremsarova.
Okay. So then let's talk about at that time, September 22nd, 2020. Do you recall that evening and why you were dispatched to a certain location?
We were working that evening, and we were dispatched to a shooting at the intersection of Brady Street and Van Buren Street.
Okay. And do you remember approximately what time you arrived there?
Approximately 8 p.m.
Okay. And that would have been shortly after the shooting, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what was your role that evening along with Officer Kremsarova?
Officer Kremsarova, I believe, stood near where the shooting victim was, and I proceeded to put up caution tape around the area, and then I was assigned other duties throughout the evening.
Okay. Now, are you familiar with that general area, Brady and Holton?
Yes.
Okay. And have you done some, excuse me, police work there, such as patrol or any other traffic duties you may have or any other investigations prior to this incident?
Yes.
Okay. And then on that night, you were dispatched there, and you said that Officer Kremsarova was involved in, I think, being there, right? Or was one of the first responders. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And where were you at that time?
While she was doing that, I started to put up caution tape around the area to keep any passerbys from coming into the immediate area.
Okay. And is that called maintaining a perimeter?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have any other roles that night?
Yes. I was instructed to call back those who had reported the incident, and as well as canvass around the area to check for any other witnesses.
Okay. So, do you remember, so you mentioned that one of your roles was to interview some of the witnesses that were there on scene. Do you remember the names of those witnesses?
I remember speaking on the phone to Rod Trell Cameron and a Stephanie Trotter.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about your other task that night. So you mentioned that you were canvassing. Can you give us a brief description of what it means to canvass an area?
So when an incident occurs, something like this, generally we'll check any businesses in the area, any houses that are in the immediate vicinity, see if there were anybody that happened to be looking out their window and saw the incident happen, or if there are any cameras in the general area that may have caught the beginning or after, or maybe the incident itself.
Okay, and how was it determined that this was a task you needed to do? Were you given an assignment by a superior officer, or was it just something that you figure out?
At incidents like this, there's supervisors that are on scene, or the detectives, and they'll just kind of divvy out the different tasks that need to get done, and sometimes you'll get this, and sometimes you'll get something else.
Okay, do you recall what your canvassing assignment was specifically?
I was told to canvass the residences and businesses to the east of the intersection of Brady and Van Buren.
Okay, do you recall, so let me rephrase that. So your assignment was to go down Brady to the east, then canvass that area?
Yes.
Okay, do you recall how many, like what kind of distance are we talking about in terms of canvassing?
I believe I did to the next intersection, and I'm sorry, I can't recall the name of the next street that is just east of there.
Okay, well, would it refresh your recollection to review some maps of the area?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit D5 previously. Do you recognize this? I guess we'll call it a poster board. Do you recognize this, sir?
Yes, it appears to be an overview of the area.
Okay. And you see Brady and Holton Street, the intersection?
Yes, I do.
Okay, if you want to point that out to us, just to be clear. Okay, and officer, from your recollection, and for the record, Judge, he pointed at the previous X mark that's already there. That was,
Officer, is that correct?
Yes.
Fine.
and Officer Debraska, can you tell us from your recollection maybe about how far you were canvassing that evening?
I canvassed up to the intersection with North Cass Street,
Okay.
stopping at the restaurant Casablanca.
Okay, so maybe about a block or so?
Yes.
Okay, did you ever come up to Marshall Street from your recollection?
Not that I recall.
Okay, all right, thank you. You can just go back to your seat. And I'm going to show you what I marked as exhibits D26, D27, and D28. Officer, I'm going to show you what's marked as Exhibit D26, D27, and D28. Can you take a look at this and let us know if you recognize this?
Yes, it's a series of 3 overview maps of the area.
Okay. Now, can I have the document back?
Yes.
Now, just to clarify, let's move that. These maps are of the same general region that we were just looking at on the poster board, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I just want to focus your attention on the streets here, not necessarily some of the markings of the buildings on this map. So, officer, you said that you had basically gone maybe a block or so as part of your canvass. And do you recall maybe how many locations you had canvassed at, such as talked to witnesses or rang doorbells?
Maybe 5 to 8 different businesses and residences, I believe.
Okay. Do you recall writing a report about all the areas that you canvassed?
Yes.
Okay. Now, would it refresh your recollection to review your report to know exactly which addresses that you had checked?
Yes.
Okay. You just take a look at that and let me know when you've had a chance to look at that thoroughly.
Okay.
Okay, you had a chance to look at that?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So, your assignment officer, And by the way, did that refresh your recollection?
Yes,
Okay, so your assignment that evening was to go from 706, well, let me rephrase that. So you stopped at 706 East Brady Street, correct?
correct.
And then you made your way eastbound on Brady, and the last address that you canvassed was 816 East Brady, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And do you recall how many different locations you may have visited?
10 locations, all on the north side of the street.
Okay. Now, I'm going to flip over to Exhibit D27. All right, officer, can you see that from where you're at?
Yes,
Are you able to see any of the numbers here? If I were to zoom in.
yes,
Okay. Now, you mentioned that 816 East Brady was the furthest east you went that night for your canvass, right?
yes,
Okay. So 816 East Brady, would you agree with me? It's hard. One moment. That 816 East Brady would have been somewhere in, if I were to mark an X, somewhere in this area?
yes,
Okay, so that's about as far as you went, and you had started at 706 East Brady, which, would you agree, is right here where I'm placing the X?
yes,
Okay, so is that accurate in terms of your route that evening for the canvass?
yes.
Okay, as part of the canvass, besides talking to witnesses, potential witnesses that is, does that also include observing cameras?
Yes.
Okay, and why is that important?
We check for cameras to see maybe flight paths, or for after an incident occurred, maybe the people fled this direction and passed the cameras, or maybe the cameras had actually caught the incident take place. So we always try and check cameras in the area of major incidents like this.
Okay. Now, were you able to speak to any witnesses that evening?
During the canvass, I spoke to a couple individuals, nobody who had actually witnessed the incident occur. Spoke to a couple business workers along the route as well.
Okay, were you able to retrieve any sort of video at that time?
No, not at that time.
Okay. But then you did complete a report about that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Was there any other follow-up on your end to do any further canvassing beyond what you did that night?
No.
Okay. Now I'm going to turn to Exhibit D28. So can you tell us what you see here?
It's an overview of the area further east down Brady Street.
Okay, and just to be specific, can you tell us what blocks it's depicting on Brady Street, or what intersections?
Brady Street from just west of North Marshall Street down to east down to North Humboldt Avenue.
Okay. And are you familiar with the restaurant Dynamite?
Yes.
Okay, do you know which intersection that is at on Brady Street?
East Brady and North Astor.
Okay, now this map, does it depict Dynamite on it?
Yes.
Okay, would you say that that is accurate of how it depicts it, as if I were to place an X here, that's generally, would you agree that that is the location, or right under the location of Dynamite?
Yes.
And just to be clear, that is the kitty corner across from Glorioso's, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Are you aware of any other officers being involved in this canvass that night?
There were other officers involved. I'm not I can't recall which officers it was.
Okay, but it wasn't Officer Krem Sarova, your partner, right?
No.
Okay. Did you have any other tasks in this investigation for the for the shooting involved in this case?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you. Nothing further. And at this time, Judge, I'd move D27, D28, and D26 into evidence.
Any objection?
No.
Fine, received. Cross.
Can you spell your partner's name for me, please?
First name is Esther, E-S-T-E-R. Kremserova is K-R-E-M-S-E-R-O-V-A.
Cross.
Yeah, just briefly. Sorry, had to make sure we got everything right there. Officer, you went down the street to see what cameras there were, is that correct?
Correct.
You went to Zanya's Pizza to see if you could get that camera?
Yes.
Were you able to get it?
No.
You made sure people know, right?
Yes.
So that's why detectives came out and were able to get that.
Yes.
Casablanca, you went there, you tried to get that security camera footage.
Yes.
And that would be why another officer went out there, is that correct?
Yes.
And that officer sat there for a long time watching a bunch of cameras. If you even know.
I don't know.
Okay. And because of what you provided, officers in the days following it went to these cameras to see if they could find them.
Yes.
Okay. Did you try to see if you could find anything in the block east of this incident?
Further down from where I stopped?
Yes.
No, I did not.
No, I'm saying in the area that you canvassed. Were you able to find any camera footage that you were able to watch?
Oh, yes.
And did any of it capture the incident?
Not the incident as it occurred.
What about the punch? Did it capture that incident?
No.
What about an incident that may have happened before, swerving? Did you see any of that?
No.
You were looking for whatever you could find
Yes.
and found nothing.
No.
And when you couldn't find anything, you made sure detectives could follow up on it.
Yes.
You also spoke to 2 911 callers.
Yes.
And you also interviewed any person that seemed to maybe have seen anything. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did anyone see anything?
On my canvas? No.
Did you talk to anybody that may have seen a suspect running away?
I recall talking to an individual that was near the perimeter of the scene who stated that he had seen something. I gathered his information and passed it along to the detectives who then took over that.
And if you had seen anything, detectives interview him. Is that
Yes.
correct? So you talked to every person you could,
Yes.
and most of them had nothing except for one guy, and you passed him on. Don't even know if it was relevant.
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing else.
Defense? Anything?
Just a couple of follow-up questions. So it just at no point, though, in your task that night was to, well, let me back up one second. At any point in time, Officer Debraska, did you speak to the wife of the deceased in this case?
Objection, Your Honor.
What was that?
Objection.
On what basis?
Where the question's going.
Did you have any opportunity to, in addition to canvassing, try to locate the area that an initial encounter had occurred between the two parties in this case?
No, I did not.
Okay. Thank you. Nothing further.
Stayed.
No.
All right, you can step down, officer. Thank you. Defense, next witness.
Judge, I believe our witness is here. It would be Lorenzo Hernandez. Just one moment. Judge, our officer isn't here just yet. We do have one more witness out there. Just one moment.
Call whoever you have.
We're going to call Officer Tivnan at this time.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Yeah. All right, you can be seated. Remove your mask, please. State your name, spell your first and last name for the record.
Patrick Tivnan, PATRICK TIVNAN.
All right, officer, you're gonna have to use the mic. Speak up. Use your outdoor voice. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Officer Tivnan. How are you?
Good morning.
All right. Now, I want to first start just with your experience. How are you currently employed?
I'm a patrol officer at the Milwaukee Police Department in District 1.
And how long have you been employed by the Milwaukee Police Department?
3.5 years.
Okay. And what training did you have as it relates to becoming a Milwaukee police officer?
I attended the Milwaukee Police Academy, which is approximately 6 months.
And what consist of that training?
Well, quite a few things.
If you could just name generally areas that you were trained on over the course of those 6 months.
Sure. Investigation, professional communication, constitutional law, firearms, emergency vehicle operations, first aid.
And as it relates to investigation, what kind of training was provided as far as it relates to performing investigations?
Quite a bit. Is there more specific?
Well, sure. Let's go in specifically to homicide investigations. Did you receive training related to homicide investigations as part of your 6 months of training?
Yes.
Okay. And what areas were you trained in as it relates to homicide investigation?
We did a training regarding the scene investigation, how to describe a scene and measure various distances of evidence and objects, or how to preserve evidence. If there's evidence located, somebody has to stand with it, wait till it's photographed, don't touch it, and that sort of thing.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about preservation. Why is it important to preserve a scene upon arrival?
So the photographs that are taken can show everything in the state that they were in at the time. That nothing has changed prior to an official record being taken of it.
Okay. And why is it important that the way that the scene is at the time an incident occurs, that it doesn't change? Why is that important?
Because that would give it the true picture, the truest picture possible of what took place.
Okay. And what kind of measures does the Milwaukee Police Department provide to ensure that a scene is not contaminated in any way upon arrival?
Sure. We typically set up a perimeter with yellow police tape, and it's called scene security, and try to ensure or at least record that nobody crosses that line unless permission is given to them for a particular reason.
Okay. And Is that also to ensure that items that are on scene are not removed from where it currently was at the time?
Yes.
Okay. And why is that important?
Again, going back to your prior question, it's important to preserve the evidence and take photos of where it is when at the time the incident occurred, to have the most clear picture of where everything was.
Okay. Now, would you agree that if an item has been removed from a crime scene, that would tend to compromise that crime scene?
Prior to that being authorized by an investigator, yes, I would agree.
Okay. Now, as it relates to investigating a homicide investigation, are getting witness testimony important?
Yes.
And why is that important?
Objection, Your Honor, they don't get testimony. Testimony is in court. They get
Okay.
statements.
That's,
They get statements. Sorry, he keeps taking my microphone.
all right, the objection is, the question was, did you get witness testimony? Testimony occurs in court. He may have got a statement or spoken to a witness. So yes, let's just move on. Go ahead.
Officer Tivnan, is it important to get witness statements at a scene of a homicide investigation?
Yes.
And why is that important?
Because they would provide a potential perspective on what happened.
Okay. And Mr. Tivnan, you talked to several witnesses as it relates to an incident on September 22nd of 2020, correct?
I believe 2.
Okay. And do you
My
recall?
recollection.
I'm sorry.
One at a time. What was the answer?
I recall speaking to 2 witnesses.
And who were the 2 witnesses that you recall speaking to?
One was Mr. Perez, who I believe has already testified, and the second was a male. I don't recall his name at the moment. I wrote it down at the time, but he did not have anything relevant and told me something that was that I judged to be irrelevant to the scene. And I wrote his name down in my notes, but did not include it in a report. I do not recall his name today.
Okay. I want to go now to defense exhibit. Give me one. We're going to go to defense 50. We're just connecting the media at this time.
Your Honor, can you give the defense evidence control?
15? Yes, number 15. All right, so I want to just kind of go through. You recognize this to be your body-worn camera on September 22nd of 2020?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I want to just kind of walk through what occurred on that day as part of your investigation. We could go to 6 minutes, please.
Operator? 6:03, is that okay?
Yeah, that should be fine. Now, I want to just stop right quick. Is that Mr. Perez that you recognize that you're?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Playing at 6:03.
Your Honor, I was going to object to hearsay and cumulative. This has been played multiple times before.
Your Honor, this is the Tivnan video. This has not been played at all in this trial.
This has been. You played this with this witness, with Mr. Perez.
Well, we're using it for a different purpose here. And
What purpose?
basically, Mr. Tivnan does not, Officer Tivnan. Officer Tivnan has obviously stated that he has some recollection issues as it relates to his investigation on that date. And obviously, this video would tend to.
Hang on. When did the officer testify he has recollection issues?
just
Those
said-
words did not come out of his mouth.
He just stated that he does not recall the second witness that he talked to.
And that'd be fine if we go to the second witness.
Right. He said he recalled this witness. You can play it for now. I'll see if it's relevant. But as I said to both sides, this is starting to get cumulative. It's starting to get repetitive. And that's going to stop. Go ahead.
Playing at 6:04.
from the guy kept on going up the bridge here, and then there's a little cut over there. They finally stopped. There's a passenger in like Kia Forte.
Is the bicycle on the street or the sidewalk? The bicycle on the sidewalk. Is he on the sidewalk the whole time? Is he on the sidewalk on break? Hands on my here? So this Kia Forte, it's like, describe a bit more about confronting. What's it doing?
They kept on like stopping, going, and that's when they stopped right there.
Okay, stand by. I'm just trying to get. You can't hear if they're like talking to him, but okay.
And then the passenger in the Kia Forte gets out.
Stopping at 6:54.
Okay, so during that conversation, do you recall being interrupted by this second individual that you recall talking to at some point?
Yes.
Okay. If we could fast forward the video to approximately 13 minutes and 17 seconds.
13 minutes and
17 seconds.
okay, it's queued up at 13:17.
Okay, you can go ahead.
2554. Chief Hernandez. All right, I need you to hang tight for me, okay? That's my understanding. Honestly, I can't verify that, but that is my understanding. But we can't tell if any other people saying that. Of course, yeah. But I believe that is the case. That is crazy.
That's why I stand up, trying to report. I work 3 jobs.
Officer Tivnan, do you recall, is that the conversation you recall continuing with Mr. Perez after being interrupted by an individual who claimed to have information?
I couldn't tell you if the clip that you just played was pre or post being interrupted by the other individual.
Okay, and that individual had,
Sorry, I didn't understand your answer. Can you say it again, please?
Yes, ma'am. The clip that was just played, I don't know if that was before or after I was interrupted by another individual.
okay. And do you believe that individual had a bandana on at the time that he came up to you?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you determine that the information that that individual had was not pertinent to this case?
He described two males that he overheard speaking in a vehicle. I believe he stated about a block and a half away in an alley to the southeast, and nothing that they said was specific regarding this incident. And at this time, I had already heard from Mr. Perez about a vehicle pulling up and his description of the incident. What this other man was talking about two males that he overheard speaking in an alley a block and a half away, did not appear to be relevant at all.
Okay.
In
And do you
my
recall?
judgment.
Okay. And do you recall taking his information down as to his name and contact information?
Yes.
Okay. And are those the two individuals that you recall speaking to on September 22nd, Mr. Perez and the gentleman that would have the white bandana on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. If we can now go to 42 minutes and 32 seconds. 30 seconds is fine. And that, I'm sorry, we can stop right there. You could back up a couple points just so we can just confirm. Right there. Is that the individual that you described as the second gentleman that had the bandana on?
Yes.
Okay. At this point, we can go to 42 minutes and 30 seconds.
Your Honor, while they're getting that set up, can we have a brief sidebar on this? Sorry.
Yes. All right, we had a conversation off the record. We can continue for now. I'd like this to be relevant evidence, and we're not going to refer to people as witnesses that are not actual witnesses to this case or this incident. That's basic trial practice. Go ahead.
Officer Tivnan, you indicated that there were 2 individuals that you followed up with as far as that you believed had information relevant to this case, correct?
Mr. Perez and the male with the bandana on his face.
And you determined that the second individual with the bandana did not have information that was pertinent to the case, is that correct?
Correct.
And there were not any other individuals that you believed on September 22nd, 2020 that had information relevant, correct?
Correct.
All right, at this time I want to now go into defense 15 and play at 42 minutes and 30 seconds.
Your Honor, I believe a question should be asked before we're just playing video.
Yes, the question should be asked. We don't play random video without some verification, without a point for the jury where it's going.
Officer Tivnan indicated that there was not a third individual that you talked to on September 22nd, 2020 that you thought could potentially have information relevant to this case, correct?
I recall speaking to 2 individuals.
Okay. And do you recall, and those are the only 2 individuals that you identified as potentially having information relevant to this case, correct?
Correct.
All right. At this time, we would like to now go into defense 15 from 42 minutes and 30 seconds. Yes. You got the volume on?
It's on top of it. That guy, I don't know. He was standing over there for a while now. Tony? I'm standing with this gentleman, Mr. Perez, as a witness, but across the way, there's a gentleman standing there. He's been standing there for a while. I'd like to go up and ask him if he saw any of this, because he's been there for a while.
Okay, try to make it quick.
Did he all good? All right.
Okay, can you stop right there?
Maybe great.
So at this point, Officer Tivnan, you identified a third individual that could potentially have information relevant to this case, correct?
I did not identify him.
Well, you saw a man that's standing over there, and you stated that he's standing there for a while, and you would like to go talk to him, correct?
Correct.
Okay, continue.
Playing at 43:15.
We'll wait for you.
I'm assuming once they're done with this gentleman, they'll come talk to you, okay? No, that's cool. I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Hey, Rick. Gentleman over here's been standing there for a while. Maybe I should ask him. Hey, Rick, did you see anything?
Oh, fuck that.
No? All right.
We got the caller, we got this gentleman, we got his wife.
Okay.
We got actually people that were.
Can you stop right there?
All right.
I don't know what he said, but
Okay, so Officer Tivnan, you then go to Officer Michelli, is that correct?
Correct.
And you asked him for permission to go talk to another gentleman that was standing over there with potential information to this case, correct?
I wouldn't call it permission. Just put it in discussion, the possibility of talking to another person who was on the perimeter of the scene.
Okay, discussion. And part of that discussion, Officer Mahalik then says, fuck that, we got enough, correct?
Correct.
And he further says, we have the wife, correct?
Correct.
He says, we have someone that called 911, correct?
Correct.
And he says, we have this gentleman, correct?
Correct.
And because Officer Mahalik, that Was that the determining factor as to why you didn't pursue this third individual who was standing there who you identified?
No.
What was the reason why you didn't go provide information to seek the information that this third individual could potentially have after Officer Mihalik says, fuck that, we got enough?
When I arrived on scene, then Sergeant, now Lieutenant Tim Garkey told me to do scene security, which is typically a standalone task. I was doing that, and as seen in the video, Sergeant Diana Barkas with the red hair came and told me to start interviewing people. That was fruitful and a good idea on her part, but at the time, I found that challenging because scene security and canvassing witnesses is typically two separate tasks.
Counsel, don't interrupt.
Once Mr. Perez had been identified as a very, what appeared to be an important witness, I had a new task to continue scene security, as then Sergeant Garkey told me to do, as well as standing with Mr. Perez to make sure that he didn't speak to any other witnesses and wasn't contaminated in a sense prior to passing him off to a CIB detective. So I had two tasks, and the idea of taking on a third task not seemed possible to do three tasks well, correctly. So I returned my attention to the primary responsibility of scene security, as well as preserving and staying with Mr. Perez as a witness.
Now, Officer Tivnan, at the particular time prior to you saying, I see this gentleman over here, you were interviewing potential witnesses, correct?
Correct.
All right, so that was your current task at that moment, right?
I had multiple tasks at the same time.
Okay, and going to talk to a third individual whom you identified as an individual who might have seen something, that would be consistent with interviewing potential witnesses, correct?
You could say that, correct.
And you would agree that there's never a point in a homicide investigation where a police department has enough, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation?
Sustained.
Officer,
Also argumentative. Never appoint. Counsel, that would mean, come on.
Officer Tivnan, it's important to talk to every potential witness available in a homicide investigation, correct?
I would agree, yes.
And at this point, would you agree that this is somewhat within the first hour that this incident took place involving force being used against Mr. Cleereman, correct?
I don't recall the actual time frame, whether this was in an hour or it was a long scene. I don't know when this, how far into my arrival on scene or to the incident this is. So I can't answer that specifically.
Now, you're familiar with the standard operating procedures of the Milwaukee Police Department, correct?
Yes.
And in those standard operating procedures, it also puts a duty on you as a homicide patrol officer to talk to every potential
Objection, Your
witness.
Honor. There is no homicide patrol officer in the Milwaukee Police Department.
Sustained. Counsel, there is no such thing. He said he's a patrol officer that responded to a scene. He outlined for you his duties, various duties as an officer. There's no homicide patrol officer. There's no such thing.
Officer Tivnan, as a patrol officer investigating a homicide investigation, it is important, based off the standard operating procedures of the Milwaukee Police Department, to talk to every witness that could potentially be available, correct?
I'm not aware of the particular SOP or stanza in SOP that you are referring to, but as a general principle, what you're saying, I would agree, yes.
Now, it's also important to keep your body-worn camera on at all times when investigating a potential homicide, correct?
There's an exception in our SOP that we can turn our cameras off for particular purposes.
Okay. And those particular purposes would include if you're concluded your role in that investigation, correct?
That is one of them, yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance is to this line.
At this time, I would like to continue playing the conclusion of the video, please.
Objection, Your Honor, is to the relevance.
How's it relevant?
Because Officer Tivnan cuts his body camera off immediately after these remarks were made by the fuck that we got enough. His body
Objection,
worn
that's
camera
not
goes
true.
off. The video will prove it, if we can play it.
No, you can't right now.
Actually, After that assertion, let them play it. It's not what happens. That's fine. Let them play it.
Fine, the state withdrew their objection.
You could go back about 5 seconds so we can get a full.
No, play from this portion.
Play it from where it is right now.
Playing at 43:35, Judge.
We got enough.
All right, fine.
That's the hard part, is trying to keep the family away.
Yeah,
That part sucks.
yeah. Is he still there? Is he still there?
Yep. You back? Are you live?
Yeah. Caught it or?
Yeah, for a little bit.
Any video discuss the officer?
Now, Officer Tivnan, at this point, Officer Mahalik asks you, are you live, correct?
Are you what?
Live.
I didn't hear that exact bit, I'm sorry. Could we replay the portion you're referring to?
Sure, we can go back 10 seconds.
It's playing at 43:50.
Is he still there? Is he still there?
Yep. You back? Are you live?
Yeah. Caught it or?
Yeah, for a little bit.
Any video discuss the officer?
Stop. Now, at that point, did you hear Officer Mahalik ask, were you live?
I heard the word live. I'm sorry, I can't hear the first two words that he's saying.
And do you recall saying, should I cut it, after he asked, are you live?
Now you mention it, it sounds like that's what I said, yes.
No more questions for this witness.
Okay, so first of all, defense counsel is stating that you cut your body cam immediately afterwards. That's not what happened, is it?
No, it's not.
Just so we're clear, that assertion is just not what happened. To begin with, you guys were talking about the hard part, you and Officer McCallum. Do you remember hearing that?
Yes.
They don't mention this at all, but that's the very next thing you guys talk about. What's the hard part?
He was talking about scene security regarding the family and keeping them outside of the perimeter and
What's
trying
so
to...
hard about keeping a victim's family outside the scene?
Well, that's very emotional because they're clearly in an extreme emotional situation, and we have to sort of enforce the perimeter of the scene, contrary to what their emotions want and some very reasonable emotions that we can understand. Yeah, we got to preserve the scene and stick with that.
And this is something you guys are talking about at all the scenes you deal with. One of the hardest parts is making a family stand on the other side of tape while you're looking at their dead loved one.
Yes.
And then you asked, is he still there? Is that correct?
Yes.
Who are you referring to?
The deceased.
Had you ever gone up to the body?
When I very first arrived, yes, and I did once again before I left. After this, at some point, yes.
Okay. And so then you guys turn off the conversation and have a private conversation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I just want to be very clear about this. Defense counsel was stating about this third person that you said, I see him standing there for a long time, right? Is that,
Yes.
you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. Did he ever wave you down?
No.
Did he ever make eye contact with you and indicate he wanted to talk to you?
No.
Did he ever glance at you and make it seem like he wanted to talk to you?
No.
Did you have any indication whatsoever from him that he had any information?
No.
He was there.
Correct.
When you do crime scenes, do people sometimes stand and gawk?
Yes.
Do you talk to every single person you see outside the tape?
No.
Okay. Additionally, officer, the second person, he was very aggressive about trying to wave you down. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Perez came and identified himself as someone that had information.
I don't recall that he identified himself to me, so I can't say exactly the initial when
But to
MPD
someone.
came in contact with. Sorry.
Sorry, I apologize, but to somebody, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the two people you talked to were people that stated we had information.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you go speak to this second guy, the guy who, just to be clear, he's talking about overhearing two African-American gentlemen in a car talking about someone geeking, right?
Yes.
And then popping them.
Yes.
He thought that maybe these two guys in an alley maybe did something to someone who was geeking.
That's what it seemed like, yes.
Doesn't seem at all like it's describing the incident that you have heard from Mr. Perez and other witnesses.
Correct.
Okay. Now, when you go speak to that guy, you actually go over by where this other guy's just sitting there standing, don't you?
Yeah, I think I would describe it as splitting the distance as well as continuing to look at Mr. Perez.
Okay. So you've got to both keep your eye on Mr. Perez, correct?
Yes.
Make sure no witnesses talk to him.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when you're talking to Mr. Perez, you told this other guy, like, you got to back off. I can't have you contaminating witnesses, right?
Correct.
So you making sure no one crosses the line, keeping your eye on Mr. Perez, going speaking to Mr. Irrelevant, right?
Correct.
Does the third guy at any point ever do anything other than just stare at what's going on at the crime scene?
No.
Does he ever look at you?
No.
Does he ever say he's got any information?
No.
So if anybody's describing him as a witness, they're just guessing.
Correct.
Okay. Now, additionally, since we have you up here, in addition to being a patrol officer, do you have another job?
Yes, I would kind of unofficially, I would describe myself, I'm the head bicycle mechanic for the Milwaukee Police Department.
And when you are the head bicycle mechanic, did you have any other specialized training in civilian before becoming an officer?
Yes.
What was that?
I worked for 4 years at a charitable organization in Chicago called Working Bikes. That was a charity focused on bicycles. And through the department, I also went to a training course at the United Bicycle Institute, which is one of two, I believe, bicycle trade schools in the United States for a certification course.
And do you work on bicycles for the Milwaukee Bicycle Unit?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 86. You were asked to take a look at stills of the suspect in this case, is that correct?
Yes.
And specifically, were you asked to take to see if you could identify the possible bicycle that this suspect was on?
Yes.
And what was, as you're looking at it, what did you believe that this bicycle was when you were looking at the photo?
It's called a GMC Denali.
Okay. And what made you think that this was a GMC Denali?
Very specifically, the combination of a grip shifter, which is a gear shifter you have to twist. That's typically only put on a mountain bike or something that's configured as a mountain bike because it slides on the end of a flat handlebar. The very unique thing about the GMC Denali is it has road-style handlebars, which are curved down. They're also called drop bars, or sometimes people refer to them as ram horns. The grip shifter, you can't slide it around the bends and the drops to get into position. So whoever manufactured the GMC Denali, I don't believe it's General Motors Company, I think it's licensed, made the bizarre choice of cutting the handlebar down the middle to slide the shifter on, and then putting a shim over it and clamping that in the stem clamp. And when I worked as a bicycle mechanic at Working Bikes, we would occasionally see this bike, and it stands out because frankly, it's bizarre, almost an absurd choice by whoever selected the components for that model. This picture very distinctly shows a grip shifter combined with a road-style handlebar. That's the only bicycle I've ever seen that on.
So when officers, before they do a search warrant, before they identify anybody, detectives come to you with this and you go, you should be looking for a guy with a, what kind of bike?
GMC Denali, so it's licensed like the SUV, but I don't think it's actually General Motors Company. But
And showing you what's been marked State's Exhibit number 60, that would be the type of bike that we see here, is that correct?
yes.
All right. Thank you, no further questions.
Defense.
Just a couple of questions for you.
Now, you testified just in your cross that, you know, the third individual didn't wave his hand at you, correct?
Correct.
He didn't say, hey, I got information for you, correct?
Correct.
But would you agree that it's your duty as a patrol officer to seek to get information in a homicide investigation?
If that is my assignment or the assignment of that officer, yes.
Okay. So it's not a civilian's duty to go to a police officer to say, hey, I have information for a homicide, correct?
I suppose no.
No further questions. I would like to move Defense Exhibit 15 into evidence.
I would
Other than the
object to
prior
15.
objections, any objection, Mr. Hubner?
Yeah, I'm going to object to 15 because 15, I think, contains way more than what was played. If you're only moving the portions that were
What's
played.
being moved and received is exactly what was played, nothing else.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hubner, anything else?
No, thanks.
All right, you can step down, officer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's a couple minutes after 12. We're going to break there for lunch. By now, you certainly know the drill. Don't discuss this case. Don't deliberate. Don't do any research on this case. If you run into the lawyers, parties, witnesses, anyone involved in this case over the lunch hour, they've been instructed not to speak to you, and you should not speak to them. I'm going to ask you to be back at 1:15. We'll try to start between 1:15 and 1:30. You can follow my bailiff out. Thank you. Everybody else can remain seated and silent, please. All right, the jury's out. It's 12:05. If I did not make this record earlier, the defendant's in court. He's in custody. He's in street clothes, as he has been for the entire trial. After lunch, who's the defense next witness?
I'm sorry, Judge, what was the question?
Who's your next witness?
I believe it's going to be Lorenzo Hernandez, officer.
Say that again. Who?
Officer Lorenzo Hernandez,
And then who else are you planning this afternoon?
Stephanie Trotter,
And who else?
Dr. John Black. And that there might be an issue I think the state wanted to raise.
Yeah, I do have an issue on that. So when, Your Honor, we were noticed, I'm sorry, we still on the record?
Yes, for a few minutes.
When we were noticed as to Dr. John Black, we were told he was going to be testifying to exposition only, simply just general.
Let's use the microphone, Mr.
Yeah, sorry. Exposition only, that there wouldn't be anything specific to this case, that all he was going to do is just generally speak, and it's in both of their notices. On Saturday.
Speak about what?
Well, he was going to, well, I don't really know. That's what I was trying to get. My understanding was he's generally going to speak about how video sometimes captures more detail than what people see, general feelings on how.
General information about videos.
And heightened emotions and how that can cause tunnel vision and how sometimes we get 20/20, whatever. It was all going to be general. It was not going to be specific. Defense counsel specifically highlighted me to 2 paragraphs and some other testimony he made in an unrelated case and said that's where they were going. Okay, fine. I asked, I was like, are you going to be attempting to get him to testify about the defendant's actions? I was told no. On Saturday, for the very first time.
Saturday, meaning 2 days ago?
2 days ago. I get 2 video clips that apparently Mr. Black has made in which he's going to be attempting to testify as to the defendant's actions.
That's not accurate, Judge.
Well, hang on. First, Mr. Hubner gets to finish. But, counsel, we don't do trial by surprise in Wisconsin. Why would we be turning anything over to Mr. Hubner on a Saturday, 5 days into a trial, knowing that I have told the jury and I expect both sides to complete this case by tomorrow, is a problem to begin with. Mr. Hubner, go ahead.
Well, that's basically it. I don't know how it's changing. All I know is I was noticed as to general, and defense counsel kept telling me it's going to be exposition. He's just going to talk generally about people.
By the way, we've discussed this multiple times
Correct.
at pretrial motions. I've made rulings, which
Yes.
are not going to be revisited for any reason that I can tell so far.
So that's just my main issue. Maybe we can bring this up after lunch and defense counsel can.
Mr. Ahmad, briefly, in 30 seconds.
So, Judge, we already had our forensic expert for the video, Mark Robinson. He introduced video. When I met with Mr. Black, and we had spoken to him months ago, he had mentioned that he had video. We told him we had a different expert for it. And when I met with him in person for the first time over the weekend, because he's from out of state, he just showed me what he internally used to look at this case, and he created very short clips.
So hang on. You want to introduce evidence that you didn't have till Saturday, that you didn't give to the state, that the courts had no notice of, that was not listed as part of the motion, that was not listed at any point in time as to what this witness is going to testify about. Brand new video out of nowhere.
I sent Attorney Huebner the email that I got with the download links. It's just something he showed me to illustrate some concepts about video. I understand.
But Mr. Ahmad, okay, we're gonna break for lunch. That's too vague. It's something he showed me to illustrate concepts about video. What does that mean relative to a trial?
So, Judge, in this case, there's going to be two major issues that the exposition testimony will focus on. One being hindsight bias, which is like, now we know what occurred. So when we look at a video, we know what we can speculate. He could have done this, he should have done this, whatever. And the other issue is about video focus and how that differs from first person perspectives, and what the eye can focus on in a moment is different from what video shows. And these are things that he testified to previously in a case that the court knows well about. So,
Mr. Ahmad, don't make me say again that this is not the Rittenhouse case, okay? It's not. And I don't care what he testified about in that case. I do not care. He will testify under the law and the facts in this case. And you and your co-counsel had multiple motions, a dozen at least, that were filed, all of which were ruled on. Mr. Huebner, you can have the last word for now, then we're taking a break for lunch.
Your Honor, I don't know why the defense counsel is going to, which is what I was told he was going to be doing, is generally speaking as this whatever hindsight 2020 whatever, and how video captures more than what people say. I don't know why he needs video clips, because the only attempt then in the video clip is for him to somehow render some expert opinion as to what the defendant knew or saw or could have seen. All of that is not relevant. He cannot testify as to what other people said. So he doesn't need the video to do it. He can sit there and talk about, hey, video may capture more and what witnesses see and all of that. Fine, don't care. Let's talk about it. But trying to somehow use video clips that I've never seen, that he's made, that I finally see for the first time on Saturday. I don't know what he's done to them. They're not the ones that were turned over to us by their other forensic expert. I'm objecting to the use of those clips.
All right, I'm taking under advisement. We're done. Back at 1:30 promptly. We're off the record.